Hello and welcome to the next 100 Days podcast. My name is Graham Arrowsmith.
And my name's Kevin Appleby. Well, Graham, have you ever had to deal with the Department for Sales Prevention?
In my corporate career, I think I was one of their least favorite people. But then again, every now and again, you came across somebody who really wanted to help you. And they had a kind of more commercial mind, but they were kind of rare. And naturally, as a legal person, you have to get things right because basically the company could be at risk and so forth. And so managing that sort of scenario is a really interesting area, especially if you're from sales. So today we have a guest, and he's got a fantastic name. It sounds sort of English and Welsh, but basically you've got Mark Sherwood Edwards. Mark, welcome to the Next 100 Days podcast.
Thank you. Very pleased to be here.
So are you English or you're Welsh?
I think I'm more English than Welsh. I think
That's
the Welsh got lost back in the day.
Anyway, well, it's good. That's good. But you have written a book which you very kindly sent me a copy, an advance copy of, and it's called The Sales Side Lawyer. And it's packed with really helpful thoughts about this conversation we're having, which is all about having a sales view of legal affairs. Now, give us an idea of where you started with this, Mark, and how did the book come about?
Well, like a lot of lawyers, I started in working in a law firm in private practice, and I kind of didn't quite fit in. And one of the things you see the same problem coming around and around again. You think, well, actually, what's the root cause? Let's go to the root cause. But in law firms, no one's interested in doing that because actually they charge by the hour, so they want the same problem to keep coming around and around. So I went in-house, and that was kind of more my style. And I worked, a lot with outsourcing companies, then tech companies who are selling B2B, right? So that then becomes a big, big thing. Now, I was always interested in, you have this sales prevention department. Lawyers say, oh, you can't do this, can't do that, and that was never my mindset, right? It's because, frankly, revenue is what puts bread and butter on the table. So putting an unnecessary brake on revenue always seemed to be bizarre. So yeah, I kind of developed a mentality about how to close deals, help people close deals, wearing two hats, right? How do I close the deal? And one hat, and okay, what things do I need to bear in mind to protect the company? You're wearing two hats.
Right.
And so that's kind of what I ended up doing primarily. And then I went on my own. Now I've got my own. It's called Clearview Legal. You can find it on the web if you look. And I kind of started doing a weekly newsletter. Still exists. It's called Oh Lordy, spelled Lawdy. And writing about sell side lawyering. And then I had enough of them, and I kind of compiled it into this book. That's a short story.
You've contracted something like what a 20 to 30 year legal career into
Yeah.
2 minutes or so, which is very impressive. And obviously you're not on the clock. So that could have lasted about 20 minutes, Kevin, couldn't it? Let's face it.
Oh, it could. It
But
could.
but
What Mark's just said there resonates so much because back in my last corporate job, I was very much selling um, consulting and outsourcing type of work, and
Yeah.
everything went through the legal department or one particular lawyer, and it was very, very difficult to get things passed. And we literally did call him the Department for Sales Prevention. But not being particularly politically correct that I know Graham will like. I remember one evening having a pint of beer after work with our head of consulting, and we were both incredibly frustrated about this particular deal. And I said to him, "How do you cope with this?" And he says, "Well, I just imagine him as one of the guys out the Village People." As my mental image of him, and it does really help me not take him as seriously as perhaps I should.
it, you your book is, and to build on Kevin's point, there's when sometimes lawyers get involved, there's a couple of things that go on. One, which is this changed the, more than one, two things, but basically one, they changed the structure of the deal. So I used to work with a Damat, the thermoware company, and I went along, And he once told me a story about a previous person from my organization who said, he's a bit like a spoon that he put on the table. We were at lunch and he put a spoon on the table. He said, when this person and I had finished a conversation, that's where the spoon was. Then he'd go away. And when he came back, the spoon was slightly skewed. It had moved a little bit. And it's that, so there's a sort of a legal sort of imperative to change things because, oh, there may be a risk there, which gets in the way, but also time. So that time. Now, one of the things that you've got in your book is um, the sale was won, the contracting process lost it. And you're saying that roughly 50% of deals die in that sales contracting process. Can you give us an idea? Because it resonates with Kevin, it resonates with me, and it must resonate with other people.
Okay, so kind of start at the beginning. What tends to happen is a company kicks off, whatever, and they get the first contract, hooray, hooray, then they get another. But so the contract is kind of archaeologically developed, right? No one's thought about it as contracting as a process, right? And there's a lot of focus in B2B businesses we're working on the sales activity, right? Because it's mentioned before, it's incredibly important. But if you're working B2B, and if you're very lucky, or Google, everyone just sign whatever you put out. Oh, they don't even see it. You just click and it's done. But if you're not, there's a kind of contract negotiation piece, right? And no one thinks about that as a process that needs to be allowed for, planned for, thought through. And at that point, it is, well, you've got two things going on. Buyers are often risk aware, right? If you look at the kind of recent research on it, or they're risk averse, more accurately, they're scared of getting it wrong, not only as a corporate way, but the individual, whoever's doing the buying, is thinking, well, if I get this wrong, that's my career damaged. Okay, so it makes them very nervous. So it's a lot easier for them to do nothing, frankly, because no one blames you for the status quo. That's one issue. The other issue, the longer the thing takes, the more friction there is, the more cost. Not great for a starting relationship. And it also gives the opportunity for something to change. Either the CEO moves on, strategy changes, or a competitor comes in with a different bid. So the longer the whole thing takes, the risk, the greater the risk you are of losing the business full stop, or and damaging the relationship where you want it to be and at the honeymoon period. So my thinking is, well, how do you do that? You can't ignore, if you're in the B2B, the fact that the sales happens. And then actually there's a bit where actually the salesperson typically drops out or becomes less important. But actually, until that legal bit happens and the paper is signed, you haven't got the deal. Sales hasn't closed. So it's a focusing on that, understanding what the issues are, reducing friction, increasing efficiency, working with the sales guys to make sure that it's all teed up right to begin with is what it's all about.
Yeah.
You mentioned the word friction, and in a sort of a kind of the way in which you look at sort of web pages and conversion and so forth. I work with a guy called Dr. Flint McLaughlin, and he's developed a heuristic which has two things which are kind of which negatively impact conversion. One being friction, and you can sort of define that in a particular way, and you can overcome it with other things, or reduce it. But the more devastating thing is anxiety, and that really, really kicks in. And I think that's the thought that occurred to me is when the guy's thinking he's anxious about the deal, and the one thing that you have to work extraordinarily hard on when it comes to conversion, and I would imagine it's the same in just contracting process, is that you almost have to work extra hard to get over the anxiety that people might have, and I don't know whether the legal side of that has a big part to play, but certainly sales does. But it's a question of how do you get over that anxiety of somebody saying, this could be my career, this could be, I could be fired for this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's the risk aversion. I can't remember the name guy, the people who developed it, behavioral economics, but they got a Nobel Prize for it, right? And they weren't, it's economics, they weren't economists or psychologists.
Sure.
And there's subsequent research which shows that is a big, big factor.
Yeah.
Well, there's a number of ways you develop it, and some of it is kind of pre-contracting, let's say someone's worried about security, right? A lot of people are, information security,
Yeah.
cybersecurity.
Mhm.
You have stuff on your website showing, we have tested it, we've whatever, good stories about it, that kind of stuff. But when you come to the contracting phase, you want, right, let me start a slightly separate point. You quite often get companies, we've got great websites, you're saying we're really customer centric and all this kind of stuff. And then when you see their contract, it doesn't much at all. It's like a totally different parallel universe, right?
Mhm.
And you've got this, not customer centric at all, pretty negative, very long clauses, which you need your PhD to understand. The whole thing's a total turn off, right? So there's a way of sort of balancing your interests as a seller, as a company, of creating these things. So actually, the guy thinks, what reads this is actually these people look pretty sensible. The agreement's kind of well written. It's laid out. It's not sentences of 1,500 words in with no punctuation. It looks middle of the road. It's kind of balanced stuff. It seems fair enough. They've considered the kind of issues I will have,
Mhm.
and that's bound to make people a bit less anxious because that is a
Yeah.
symptom of the people they're dealing with. It reflects the nature of the people that they're dealing with.
Do you find, I mean, in a sales situation, sometimes people say, sign my deal, sign my terms versus, no, hold on a minute, you're buying my service, so sign my terms.
Yeah.
Where, how do you resolve that?
Well, you get that typically with large companies with big procurement company, big procurement departments, and typically large banks. If you're selling technology, large banks,
Yeah.
you get a lot of that. And in fact, if you look at the book, there's a section, there's a four-part series, I think, on being battered by a large bank. So I had a friend who's a CFO of a software company. I gave him a ring, how are you doing? He said, "We'd spend your time doing it." And he said, "I spend my time being battered by large banks." So that's where it came out.
Mm.
You're not ever going to win the argument. Well, you might be able to persuade. Sometimes you win. Okay, so if you've got a SaaS contract, for example, and they haven't got anything close to SaaS, you say, "Look, guys, there's just so much change here. It's not worth it."
Mm.
But assuming that's not the case, you just have to box clever, right? Then the negotiation becomes very important, right? And there's a section in the book on negotiation, and one of the key things negotiation, in my view, is humor and
Mhm.
charm, right? Because what happens in negotiation, they think start off as procurement, they think you're the seller, therefore everyone's playing these fixed roles which are kind of dehumanized. As soon
Yeah.
as you can choose humor in it, everyone
Yeah.
becomes human again, right? Then you have to understand their issues and listen to their issues, respect their issues, and show that you're trying to cope with it. Um, and but then you kind of have to then you have to be serious about risk. In a sense,
Mm.
if you've been in business for 3 years, you should know what your risk profile is, right? So you can
Mhm.
actually, we can live with this risk. The chance of it ever biting us are pretty small. And that's kind of how you work around it. You're never going to have a totally reasonable discussion, to be blunt, with a large bank or a large company, the big procurement department, because they're not there to be reasonable, right? That's
I,
not.
I, I couldn't agree more. But Kevin, you brought up earlier this importance of or the reason that people are sales preventative. But it seems to me that they probably, as people, they don't really want to do that. But maybe the almost like the tools that they have, um, and the things that they have to deal with. And I'm thinking, well, okay, if you split a contract up, there are certain things that probably easier to, shall we say, pass through. But then there are other things which are like, you know, have a diamond sort of edge to them that just they can't penetrate. They won't accept. So I'm thinking, what are the key elements of an agreement that tend to get in the way? Is it termination? Is it the service itself or the product itself? Pricing, terms of payment? What is it that you find really buggers up the show?
The one that people always argue about is a limitation of liability about something or other. That's the classic one that's always there. And it's typically an argument between two lawyers, right? And the nature of the argument is it's totally arbitrary. There's no right or wrong because it's this thing, right? But actually, the real useful way to look at it is risk is a price point. We, you're the seller, we're the seller. We have included, we got limitation liability at 100%, 125%, whatever it is. And, we have priced on this basis. So then what you say to the buyer is, look, you can have whatever limitation liability you want. We'll just increase the price proportionately, right? Because risk is a price point. Now, particularly if they're a seller, it's quite hard for them to, so if they're a buyer and a bank, it's quite hard for them to say, well, hold on, how come risk is a price point? Well, if you're a bank, you can't argue that point because all lending is based on risk assessment. Um, so then what happens, what's really useful is you've taken what was a legal issue and turned it into a commercial issue. So once you say risk, you can have whatever thing you want, just increase the price. You've
Mhm.
moved away, you've taken it away from their lawyer and taken it to their commercial person, and their commercial person will be much more reasonable than a lawyer. And then what tends to happen is they've probably got a budget, so they don't want to change their budget or whatever. They just don't want any more, they don't want to get on with it. So they usually, you don't even bother to increase the price, they just drop the point. That's what typically happens. Now, the way you prepare for that is what I call the sales side setup. So when you make a proposal, you make it very clear, this price, our proposal and our pricing is based on our T's and C's, which are, attached or URL or whatever. We're happy to discuss T's and C's, changing T's and C's, but please note this may have an impact on the price.
Mhm.
Now, that's kind of self-evident, but by doing the setup, you've kind of prepared it, and then when procurement starts beating you up, trying to beat you up, you say, well, hold on, be fair, right? We made this very clear right from the front, right at the beginning. And then it's not a silver bullet, right?
No,
It
no,
doesn't
no.
suddenly magically fix everything. But, people in procurement aren't stupid either. They are, they're sensible. They know they've got to do their job, but they're
Yeah.
not morally empty and they're not business empty. They know what they're doing. So it just makes it harder and they have to concede or increases the chance of them agreeing with what you're saying.
It-
Yeah,
it-
I can really resonate with that, Mark. It's we're a relatively small company that are just starting to deal with fairly big deals with fairly big buyers. And that liability one, it's come up a couple of times already. And you might get something like, oh, you're organizing mentoring for their CFO. It's a £5,000 contract, but there's mentoring together. Legal folk come back and say, oh, liability unlimited. We'll say, no,
Mm.
liability limited the value of the contract. We're not having unlimited liability on a mentoring contract. No way.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed. And actually, to be blunt, yeah, anyway, so, all that stuff. I mean, e- each, not a lot of the contract terms can, in fact, so if you say our payment terms are 15 days and they say, well, I want 90, well, you can argue about it, or you could say, sure, no problem, I'll increase the price by 5%,
hmm.
whatever the argument is, whatever the thing is. So that it brings everything into a more sensible area.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. I like that piece of advice, actually, Mark. And as a result of that, I'm going to go and have a look at a couple of our proposal documents and see if there is a standard line in them that says the price might increase if you don't agree with the terms and conditions.
Yeah.
I, I do. I know we're jetting around here, but you've got a brilliant book which has got little bits of nuggets on everything. Um, Little bits, big bits of nuggets. But basically, you've got a chapter 35 which talks about FOMO versus FOMO.
Yeah.
You're going to have to help me with that. But basically, I think I know what it means. But FOMU versus FOMO.
Yeah.
What's the difference? How does it apply to legal contracts?
Well, one is fear of missing out, and the other one is I can't remember what the other one, but the other one is about
Messing up. It's
messing
fear of
up.
messing up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And fear of messing up is the driver.
Yeah.
But it's a risk aversion again, right? So
Yeah.
so
Right.
that's what it is. So what do you if you look at that article, that you'll see that the issues are how do you make for the this is the point is the research that someone I can't remember the book is called, but I think during COVID they got hold of like 2 million recorded calls, sales calls, and they
Yeah.
assessed and they they you probably put AI through it and assessed all the stuff. And the conclusion was that what drives the buying decision is not actually the buyer's view of the corporate risk primarily, but the buyer's view of their personal risk. Understandably, right?
Mm.
So it's how do you, it's back to, it's kind of what we're talking about a bit earlier. What
Yeah.
steps can you take to mitigate that risk and make it lower the perceived risk that that individual buyer has on the impact on their career? How do you uh, do things to make it more comfortable for them?
You've done so much in your book, you can't remember everything. So
Yeah,
one of the things I'll just quote back at you is one of the, in terms of contract safety nets, you talk about safety nets, and one of the
yeah.
examples of that was an easy termination clause. I don't know if you want to talk us through that, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I will. Okay, there's a number of interesting aspects to this. So, um, everyone wants to sign customers up to long-term contracts, right?
yeah,
But there's a number of downsides to that. Now, if Kevin, is saying you worked in an outsourcing business, you'll know that the way this used to work is you'll sign up someone for 1 year, for 5 years, or 7 years, or 10 years, whatever. And the first year, it all went really well. Um, then in the middle period, actually, you as a supplier got lost interest, got distracted by other more exciting deals coming in. And suddenly you realize, oh my God, we've only got 1 year before this contract ends and we want them to renew. And then you'd go back to try and be really good, by which point the customer had got a bit pissed off with you and wouldn't renew is the typical thing that happened. That was quite common in my view. And one of the points I make, and it's not necessarily the right answer, but it's an answer and it's a point, is actually culturally, is this the right approach? Is it because when you've locked someone in for 5 years, 7 years, or whatever, the tendency is for your business not to is take them for granted. And so the quality of the service, the quality of the account management drops because, all businesses, this is going to be a bit of a distraction. All businesses, there's the glamorous pound and the non-glamorous pound. The glamorous pound is sales. The non-glamorous pound is the money you get from existing people cross-selling or whatever. Now, glamorous pound always gets more traction and more focus in a business, which is slightly odd when you think about it. It's a pound. And actually, the non-glamorous pound is cheaper to get. It's cheaper to cross-sell, upsell, whatever, than it is to whatever. So, the cultural point I'm making is, wouldn't it be better to be really brave as a company and actually not lock people in and say, look, you have 12 months while we just get everything stabilized. After that, you can leave whenever you want because we're
yeah,
focused on providing you a really good service so you won't leave, right?
Yeah.
That's a cultural, non-business, non-specifically legal issue.
and it punctures that anxiety, and
And it
that's
punctures
yeah,
anxiety, right? You say,
yeah,
look, if we're not any good, you just leave. That's fine
yeah,
because we're
yeah.
prompt. We're self-confident enough that we can do it this way, and we're fair enough that we're not going to lock you into with lots of legal cobbly
Something like
stuff.
that, Mark, is so I think attractive. It kind of bridges that gap between personal desire for the contract and
Yeah,
corporate desire. It's like a bridge, that kind of an approach, because anybody else in corporate would be thinking, "Oh, that's a smart move."
yeah.
They're not going to say, "Oh, that's weak." No, not at all. They're
Well,
going to think he's done well there.
yeah, well, yeah, on the buy side it will, but I tell you what also happens on the sales side is that people want to see annuity revenue, right? Now, I remember I was brought in to fix a broken legal department that sold mainly a lot of payroll stuff. Now, payroll is the stickiest thing you can possibly sell.
Mm.
And it's about the only business I know or service I know where the buyer will run the old provider and the new provider in parallel for a month or two just to make sure they don't get it wrong, right? This is assumed businesses are
Yeah.
medium to big, right? Now, this business is so sticky that why do you need to lock people in, right? And And I was trying to persuade this company, don't lock people in on the contract because actually they're locked in just by being in payroll.
Yeah.
But what happens is that if you've got investors, they look at the Excel spreadsheet, they look at the annuity revenue, and they say, "Oh yeah, that's what we want." What the Excel spreadsheet does not tell you is the business you lost because you wanted to lock people in and made you risk. They were risk averse, so they
Yes.
didn't sign you up.
Mm.
So there's this side effect of what you can measure in a spreadsheet and what you can't
Yeah.
easily measure. So actually, um, not only do you get past the fear of messing up by easy, actually, the chances are you may, well, it's kind of the same point. You bring in more customers by doing that.
Yeah, gosh, that outsourcing area, Mark, it opens up a can of worms in my mind. I love what you're saying there about not have the long-term deals. I remember the very, very last job that I did for my last big corporate employer was effectively look at an outsourcing deal that we'd done that the customer wanted to get out of, and they wanted to take us to court for failure to deliver. Now, we didn't buy into the relationship was totally broken, and there should
Yeah,
have been an easy way to walk away. And I think we spent 2, 3 months going back through everything that happened during the sales process. And we found that actually there were, to get the deal over the line, that was incredibly complex. The contract was full of "we'll agree to agree"
yeah, yeah, yeah,
clauses. In other words, yeah, we'll sort that out somewhere down the line after the contract's signed. And it turned out that most of the reasons that things had gone wrong was that nobody had ever agreed on a lot of these clauses. And we found that 75% of those were actually the customer's fault. It was the customer was supposed to have done something they never did. And we got to this position that, well, you sue us, we'll sue you.
yeah, yeah.
And we did walk away amicably in the end, realizing that there were problems on both sides. But one of the things that to me gets in the way of that, let's have something easier to get out of than 10 years. And some of these big outsourcing deals, you know, year one, you're going to make a loss. Year
Yes,
two,
agreed,
you're going to make a loss
agreed.
because you're going in there and you're transforming the systems, you're changing the processes, and you
Mm.
realize you can have a far more efficient process in years 5, 6, 7, where you're actually going to make some money and
Yeah.
recoup the losses you made in years 1 and 2. So you don't want that contract breaking
No,
in
that
year
yeah.
three.
Look, that's absolutely a fair point, and it depends a bit on the contract, right? So, but if you're certainly if you're doing a SaaS contract, you don't have that kind of issue because there's
Hmm.
the cost of adding an additional person is kind of minimal.
Yeah,
Um, but you would need, yeah, in those kind of contracts, you do need to do what's the break even point, and you can maybe lock them into the break even point, or take a bit of a risk on it, and all that kind of stuff, and maybe you could have a allow, we'll improve the stuff, and then we have a kind of you can exit, but you have to recover some additional cost or whatever. But I think
Mm.
I'm trying to make the point is more, um, let's not automatically lock people in
hmm,
because I take your point absolutely, but there is the counter behavior that people actually, to your point, there's all this stuff in the contract which people should have been account management should have been working through
yeah.
and doing all that stuff. And actually, they all got distracted because there's some more glamorous stuff
Yeah,
happening down the road.
that's exactly what did happen. Sales
Yeah, I think.
walked away without making sure that everything was in place that should have been once the contract was signed. Because
Well, it's
the
kind
other
of not so.
outsourcing deal looked
Yeah,
a lot more exciting than the one we'd just done.
yeah, yeah. Well, exactly, and it kind of not really sales function at that point, right? I mean, the account management, the sales leads up to the contract getting signed. But then the people going to own the contract and make it run and make it successful need to be part of the whole negotiation process. Because they can say, I can live with that, I can live with that, and I can't live with that because they've got to deliver it, right? And if they're not
Mm,
involved in the business, in that pit, there's a total mismatch within the business. There's a dysfunctionality which you're building in.
I,
absolutely, yes.
can I change the focus a little bit? And it resonates with me because basically I'm not the size of Kevin's business. But basically for years now, I don't know, 12 years, and I've occasionally come across clients who say to me, I provide data for high net worth affluent campaigns. And it's a bit like if you wandering up to EasyJet and saying, oh, I'll pay in 30 days. And they'll say, well, yeah, try the bus or
Yeah, yeah.
get a boat or walk. They're not letting you on the plane. So basically, they have payment terms which are appropriate to them, and so do I. And but sometimes it feels like the customer wants to treat you like a bank, and I'm not a bank. I have to get money in to pay money out, and so therefore, and that's how I run my business. It's all about cash, cash in and cash out. But you've got a section, your chapter 42 says when your customer thinks you're a bank. What's behind that?
Well, it's exactly that point, right? That they do that. They do that. And I think there's one example where actually the payment terms, it was in Canada, were 365 days.
Right,
And yeah,
right,
and
right.
I
That's
don't know.
just
Yeah, I don't know. Personally, I don't know why. Well, I do know why companies do that for obvious reasons.
mm.
I understand the economics, but I don't know morally why they do that, right?
You
And
must be into a really, really crappy situation and crap, and you have an appalling management system. If you're accepting terms that are not reasonable for your company, you have to pay things, and they're not paying you. They're accepting a service but not paying. That's completely unfair. And big companies taking advantage of small companies, not a good look.
no, well, I personally I agree, but we know it goes on, and and so on. I mean, the one exception I think is sometimes if you say, well, you're going to pay me yearly in advance, something like that, then you can take 60 days rather than 15 days. You'll be getting paid yearly in advance rather than monthly or something. That kind of balances out. But
Mm,
I do,
mm,
yeah, I think it's a cultural stroke more. I mean, you see the business rationale is clear,
yeah.
but the kind of moral, cultural thing is you think, oh,
I
really?
I had a potential client not too long ago. In fact, I think it's still pending, but basically we're saying, well, I and the original conversation went along the lines of, well, I've never done this thing before, and it involved direct mail, and I'd
Yeah.
done it for years. Never done it before, but then came back and said, well, I think the budget for this should be this. I'm like, right, so you more or less said you don't understand it, but you want to reduce my price. So I said, well, okay, well, I can take this bit out, and then that fits your price, actually slightly lower. So do you want that? Because I'm not giving you this bit for the same price because
Yeah.
I don't make any money. So it's just I think you kind of mentioned that before, but you just take bits out as opposed to leave things in and reduce your margins. I just don't want to work in that way.
No, that's fine.
And I
But
just think,
equally on the price point, you could say, sure, you could pay 60 days. Let me just put the price up by 5%.
yeah, well, I'm just of the view that I might be really old fashioned, but I just don't offer credit. So
Yeah, yeah.
it becomes so much easier to say no,
Agreed.
and or at least that I'm not saying, hey, look at my terms. Just I'll say to somebody's face that's not what I'm going to do. You're very welcome to find that somewhere else if there's somebody
Yeah.
prepared to do that. But you if you had to sort of summarize the top three or four things that let's call them small businesses face when it comes to contracts with anyone and that you get involved in because of the nature of what you are, what are
Well,
they going to be?
look, I think the way you look at take it, my view, take a step back from contracts, and I classify them in kind of three bands. There's no touch. So if you sign up to Google, right, no contract negotiation, HubSpot, no contract negotiation.
Yeah,
Then there's a low touch,
yeah,
which is a bit of fiddling around and stuff. Yeah, can you change this, change that? Then there's high touch, which is a lot of negotiation. And your business may be operating in one of those categories or two or whatever, but whatever business you're in, you're trying to move it all to the no touch.
yeah.
You want to do
Agree.
that.
Yeah,
One of the ways that you to get no touch is not to put paper in front of people, not put the contract in front of people, because that invites them to read it, right? And if they got lawyers, invites them to get their lawyers to look at it. You're better off having some kind of online system which says, click on our tick on,
Terms.
T's and C's, click on a
Yeah,
privacy policy,
yeah,
enter your credit card, whatever, and off you go. That's the best way to do it. Particularly if you're not charging, hundreds and thousands or whatever. That as soon as you put something in there and that in there that in front of people, uh, then and it's legal, then you're kicking off something.
yeah,
So if you don't put it in front of them, that's the first approach to take. Um, then have it kind of the next step is have it short
mm,
and non-legal, right? So one thing is you can format things as you can do something like a letter. Right. You
yeah,
can look, one of the fundamental issues is, are you getting paid in advance or in arrears?
mhm,
If you're getting paid in advance and you can make people pay you in advance, and frankly, then a lot of the legal stuff may depending on your kind of business,
yeah,
may disappear, right? If it's obvious what you do,
yeah,
then is it? If it's software license, then not, because you define, territories and so on. So being paid in advance takes away, in my view, a lot of the legal issues. 'Cause a lot of the legal
mm,
issues are about, well, can I recover the money you owe me?
yeah,
Um, then keeping the contract ultra simple, and you can contract as a letter, right? You can say, "Dear Joe Blogs, we've discussed it, right? So this is what I'm proposing. We do this, this, and this. You'll pay
yeah,
me this, this, and this." And you sign the letter and say, "If you agree with this, countersign at the bottom, send the letter back to me." Another
yeah,
way
sounds
of,
good.
yeah,
Yeah,
another way of making it less legally burdensome.
yeah,
And then there's just writing in plain English and have headings and all that stuff and being
yeah,
reasonable and stuff. And what
yeah,
is quick digression? When you look at things like the Google terms, HubSpot terms, those are the most complicated contracts you'll ever see.
yeah,
If you try and work, because it's always, it starts with one thing, there's a hyperlink here, and there's a hyperlink there, and there's all about 5 or 6 documents all spread over,
yeah,
and to see the whole contract, you've got to pull them together. It's a
yeah,
funny thing,
yeah.
but when you have a contract people aren't going to read, you can make it as complicated as you want. If you've got a contract that people are going to read, don't make it overcomplicated.
I wonder if I don't know if there's any evidence of this, but I wonder if these ultra large contracts, which we all sort of, nod through, because frankly, I haven't got enough time
Yeah,
left in the rest of my life
absolutely.
to. So basically, you just agree. But I wonder how many times they come back and bite somebody on the backside with that contract. Probably not that many.
Well, not that many because you just well, there's no way you're going to sue Google,
Yeah.
be realistically.
No.
And you just leave at some point and kind of leave on a kind of once bitten, twice shy kind of way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So those ones don't bite so much. And also, frankly, there's loads of people using them.
Mm,
So, they have to cater for a
mm.
large number of people. So they have to adjust for a large number of people.
Yeah, I guess that. Yeah. Kevin, Mark is a bit of a breath of fresh air. He's unusual. He's probably in a category of one when it comes to lawyers and or legal for commercial. When people realize that, Mark, and they've liked what you've said, and your advice is clearly well thought through, and dare I say it, common sense. But basically, you've got this ability to understand the legal framework, but then you translate it through a lens that salespeople, and others can understand. And so what I would class is most of the people in an organization should be salespeople, or they all have the permission to sell. But basically, that's from the sales, from the board down. So if you can make it easy for them to understand, and they're not all doctors of understanding, they're just people. And
Yeah.
that legal side needs a professional to make it easier. If somebody wanted to sort of find out more about you, you've mentioned that you've got salesidelawyer.com. So that's salesidelawyer.com.
Yeah.
And if they wanted to find you on any other platform, which would be the one that you would favor?
Well, I'd go to salesidelawyer.com and my you can contact me through there. I think my email's in there actually, to be blunt. Or you can try LinkedIn as well.
Yeah,
I'm on LinkedIn.
yeah,
Um, and actually, historically, for various reasons, it doesn't quite make sense in some ways. I've got fractional GC as another website for people, fractional people. But salesidelawyer.com works. Uh, there's no hyphen; it's all three together. So that
yeah.
or LinkedIn, and yeah, those ways to get hold of me.
I don't know about you, Kevin, but I've found Mark incredibly. He just has an answer to everything. We could have been here all morning asking him
Yeah.
questions,
Mm.
and I dare say that's how your business life works. You get into a
Yeah.
company, and they've probably got an endless list, but you make everything simple for them. Have I got that wrong?
No, well, I don't look. I think if you right, a business has a number of disciplines, right? Finance, operations, sales, whatever, and all of them are looking at the same thing or should be looking at the same thing. And then you have a slightly different view because you're a lawyer, because you're HR, whatever. But essentially, you look at the same thing, and your primary point of view, in my view, should be as a business. You see it as a business, right? What
Yeah.
are we trying to do? What's the upside looking for? What's the downside we're worrying about? All that kind of stuff. Then you translate it into legal, and yeah. So and not to boast unnecessary or too whatever. Understanding a subject means being able to take the complexity and simplify it. That's a test of anyone, any area of expertise. It's
Mhm.
can you take the complexity and make it simple?
Yeah,
Anyone can take simple, make it complex.
yeah.
Take complex and make it simple is what it really is all about. It's what expertise is about.
Well, Mark, you've been an absolutely first-class guest on the Next 100 Days podcast. Kevin and I thank you.
So, Graham, really, really interesting conversation with Mark there. And I was particularly interested because you get to that stage as a small business where you might have been dealing with very small deals, individuals, in case of Grow CFO, membership business, and the legals are pretty simple. But you get to that stage that rather than selling one membership seat to an individual, you're suddenly talking to a CFO who wants to buy 50 seats. And if
Mm,
it's the CFO of the company that wants to buy 50 seats, guess what? They've got a legal department. So suddenly you thinking, well, this is simple. Here's our standard terms and conditions. Bang. Oh, here's our terms and conditions as a buyer.
mm.
And that suddenly, and that's something that's come across my desk in the last couple of months on more than one occasion. I've never had to deal with before.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
It's yeah. In my past I have, and it's irksome. It really is, but it's understandable.
Mm.
They're trying to protect their business. You want the best for yours, and but Mark gave us a few good responses to that, and the book is definitely worth investigating. Again, it's the sales side lawyer, and just to give you an idea, it's got lots of different sort of chapters. They're not long to read, but it could be that you can actually. But there's occasionally you'll have uh, graphs and so forth, which sort of ex which put in graphical terms the problem. And I think you'll find it a very, very good read, and kind of helpful. It's a bit like having Mark on site. But yeah, I found it, it's an unusual combination, isn't it? Sales and being a lawyer. But it's almost like he's moved a little bit towards a sales perspective, without losing his sense of understanding what a legal contract is.
Exactly, exactly. And you know, there's a lot of small businesses that get into exactly the situation I've just described and haven't got a clue which way to turn. So I think
Yeah.
the sort of advice Mark is giving here is invaluable.
Well, Kevin, on that note, today I've been Graham Arrowsmith.
I've been Kevin Appleby. Goodbye.
Goodbye.